welcome. We have as our special guest today Amir Muhammad, who's the founder and president of the American Islamic Heritage Museum and Cultural Center. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Brother Amir. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Brother Amir, I thank you for joining us, and I just want you to begin by telling our viewers your transition and your conversion into Islam and how it came about. Were you born a Muslim or were you converted, and how was that? How did that take place?
I was reverted back to Islam back in 1974 in Connecticut, and went through the transition of the Nation of Islam, and then came under the leadership of Imam Worthy Muhammad. And for the last 35 years, I've grown and developed. I've traveled around the country, and with the development of Islam, it brought me back to my natural self. It allowed me to be a good human being, a productive human being, and where Allah has says that He turns all to a goal and a qadr, or destiny. And through the vehicle of Islam, I found my destiny. And part of that destiny is to share the history of Islam in America, because so many people have a misunderstanding and misperception that Islam is something new or foreign to America's shores, and it's not true. My research, because I've come into a Muslim within a Christian family, my father and them used to always criticize me. They always doubted that there was Muslims in Africa or we had any Islamic connections. So I started, as the Quran encouraged us, our kinfolk ties, to keep them and develop them. I started doing my genealogical research and found that my father and my family comes from the coast of Georgia, which they call the Guinea or the Geechee people. And later on, properly, they call them the Gullah people. And the Gullah people was people that they said those God Allah people, those people that believed in Allah. Come to find out, in my research, I found my African ancestor that was born in Africa and brought here, captured and enslaved. And within that research, I found there was Muslim communities there. Matter of fact, we lived on the mainland, and on the islands, it was the first two Muslim communities ever existed in America. There were, in 1812, in the War of 1812, one brother named was Bilali Muhammad told his slave master, he said, look, I got 80 men to help defend this island. I cannot count on the Christians that you own. Then on the other island, St. Simon Island, there was another Muslim named Salih Bilali. And there's reports about them. Matter of fact, Bilali Muhammad, his Risala, or a book that he wrote in Arabic, is still existing today, on display currently at the Museum of Anacostia, the Smithsonian Museum. And then with Salih Bilali, his slave master said that at his deathbed, he said there was no God but Allah and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. Okay. Then we found tombstones that they had left with the one finger on it. And that reminded me of the story of Bilal ibn Rabah, may Allah be pleased with him, Allah, that Bilal, when he converted to Islam, he was tortured, trying to, his slave master tried to convert him back. Tortured him out in the desert, put a rock on his chest, and all he could say was ahad, ahad. When he couldn't say ahad no more, he put up the one finger. And we find these one finger tombstones all around the United States. And they might have different names on them, but we found them all around the United States.
So this experience that you had came later on in your life. As a youth, when you accepted Islam as your religion?
Yes, I was 17 years old.
What attracted you to the religion?
What attracted to me to the religion was, one, I was looking for something different. At the time, the Nation of Islam, there was more organized, there was a sense of unity, a sense of belonging, cleanliness, and also they helped transform people. They was well known for making transformation. People transforming themselves, cleaning their life up. There was a sense of brotherhood, a sense of bondage. And then within the teaching, they show you that God is greater, that you have to worship God, no man, no human being. And then it also had me around a community that will nurture and nourish that development and that growth.
Speak to our viewers concerning some of the challenges you faced and some of the challenges your friends and loved ones faced when they accepted Islam, and if those challenges still exist or did they leave us?
They still exist in many parts and with many people, and especially with today with the misperception of Muslims and with the national or international attention of terrorism, and they trying to label it as Islam or Muslims. So many people have a misperception, but I found that, kindness, Allah tells in the Quran, neighborly deeds. I know I had an aunt. It seemed like most of my family became more religious after I became a Muslim. But I had an aunt that was a staunch Christian or somewhat anti-Islam, but she had a Muslim doctor, and she loved that doctor, respected that doctor. But I found that later on, eventually, I know that I've heard my mother and my father say, when people try to talk about Islam or Muslims, say, no, I don't know what you're talking about. I know what Islam has done for my son. It has improved his life. And there's many parents that are out there can testify that Islam has corrected and improved upon their children's character, their children's personality. So initially there's a resistance because out of ignorance, not knowing. But if that Muslim practice kindness, being fair, follow the dictates of the Quran as far as being kind to your parents, kind to your kin, kind to your neighbor, and doing neighborly deeds, eventually kindness will win out and they'll have a greater appreciation of it.
What do you surmise brings about this anti-Islam climate that we're seeing right now, and do you think it's done intentionally, or you think it's just done completely out of ignorance?
I would say some of it is intentionally for some. Some of it is well, ignorance is the base of all of it, because God is one, and there's many vehicles to get to God. You know, in the Quran it says that the Quran is a book that's a confirmation of the books that came before it, the Jews and the Christians, the Sabians. It identifies as far as people of the book. So we're taught that there's paths that leads to God. And some of the Christians, they think that it's isolated. You have to go through one vehicle, one door. And as the sun shines on everyone, rain goes everywhere. God is not limited. But you have some people out of ignorance intentionally want to down Islam. Where like for me, growing up as African American and as a male and as a Muslim, I face 3 levels of racism or 3 levels of ignorance. Being a male, African American, and as a Muslim. And I remember when living in Richmond, Virginia, I got a promotion in one of the larger retail stores, outlets, from assistant manager to a manager. And quite a few people telling me I was going to the heart of in Richmond, Virginia, South Side, which supposed to be a lot of racism and everything. And in my interview, one guy found that I was from Connecticut and called me a Yankee. I told him, I thought the Civil War was over with, But eventually, that respect for that human being, Americans will respect a human being. Once they get to know one-on-one, they learn to appreciate you and respect you as a human being. So it's basically a lot of it's out of ignorance, not knowing, not experiencing.
Those people that are causing the confusion and the fitna as it relates to Islam spreading here in America and worldwide, those people that are causing it intentionally, what do you think brings that on?
Some of the mistakes that we made as Americans in our policies, some of it through our biasness and our political activities. But as a matter of fact, I went overseas with the State Department, with the exhibit, where that the human beings or the individuals that work for our government, they try to reach out to the people to show the other side, the human side of the Americans. And we traveled to Nigeria and we traveled to Qatar with the exhibit. And the Americans are trying to reach out to the people to get them to come to get to know us as a people. Because nowhere in the world you see so many different faiths coming together, living as you see in the United States. And you don't see those fighting and the wars going on. We've learned to respect one another as human beings, as individuals, and as diversity. And I think that one of the most beautiful thing about America is America's diversity and the ability for people to come together and work together. We have the history of America, ugly America. We know the civil rights movements, the Jim Crow laws, the enslavement, the racism, the bigotry. But it's a dying thing, it's a dying thing, and goodness is on the rise. You see around in the Islamic world, people are fighting for the freedom. And one of the things that I came through the door that I came through Islam, was the door of Nation Islam. Their principles was Islam meant freedom, justice, and equality. And this is what we look for justice. And I think that once America moves towards a policy of a just and fair justice and fairness, tension will die down.
You spoke about your travels overseas and how you went on behalf of the American government in trying to espouse the dignities of Islam. Speak about what you think about the Muslims that are from overseas and they come to America. How do you think they envision both those that have accepted Islam as a religion and just the Muslim community at large?
Well, you have, I would say, three levels, three stages. The early Muslims that came over in the 30s, and well, really, records show that some of them started coming in 1850. We found census with one brother named Muhammad, came from Arabia, living in California in 1850. So he kept his name Muhammad. We found some with the name Kate Islam, Henry Abdullah. So they kept their identity. But then you find in the 30s and the 40s, with the fall of the Ottoman Empire, you find the first wave of them tried to merge into American society, become more Western.
Were they rejected?
They were not rejected because it was an isolated area. Cedar Rapids, Iowa, Dearborn, Michigan at the time, also Ross, North Dakota. So some of them were rejected, but a lot of them tried to merge into the American society. But their second generations, and we accepted Islam, was reinvigorated. And now today you see Muslims wearing the hijabs, taking on pride. And I think some of that came from really the Muslims, the indigenous Muslims, helped give them pride, because when they first came, some of them had the name Muhammad, it became Mo. If they had the name Bilal, it became Billy. But now you see them wearing their name in pride and character and dignity. And I think Muhammad Ali contributed a lot to that. Malcolm X contributed a lot to that. Muhammad Ali used to whoop people. If you call him anything other than what his name, that has changed. And now he was hated and despised, but now he's loved and admired, an American icon.
With this resurgence of Muslims rising here in America, we also see a resurgence of anti-Islam as it relates to the Sharia law. There's a report out of Tennessee now that if you are caught making wudu, you have the possibility of going to jail. So the backlash of the anti-Islam movement is up and rising. What do we need to do as Muslims to combat that and further concretize our religion here in America?
Well, we need a couple things, you know. One, I think that's this bizarre bigotry, ignorance. And that's when we open up a museum to the public so people can come learn about Islam, about Muslims being a part of the American fabric. That's just chaotic. You know, that's religious oppression. And in America, we have, the law of the land allows you religious freedom, religious expression. So Muslims need to understand American law, understand comfortable with themselves as Muslims, and come together.
That's an excellent point, but let's speak about this. You have a mainstream media that's speaking vehemently against Islam in some factions. How do you combat that? How do we combat that when you have mainstream media forever portraying Islam in a negative light? The veil problem, the niqab problem, the hijab problem, the mosque being built, the lack of the anti-minarets. We're still fighting 9/11. 9/11 happened, what, 11 years ago, 10 years ago, and it's still at the forefront of the news. How do we combat that?
One, we need to have our own news televisions. We need our own media, be able to tell our own story, to be able to tell our own narrative. The Muslims around the world that have that oil wealth, the gas wealth, or the mineral wealth, need to share that wealth to help to portray a better image. A lot of times, you know, some of the problems coming from them. So in order to help correct some of the solution, and you know it's in the media, we need to have more media exposure. We need to have more funding support, more efforts to go out on television and national television. They need to do more.
Brother Amir, thank you very much. You've been a great guest. We really appreciate all the history you've given us, and it looks like Islam bodes well for America.
Yes.
Salaam alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you on the next show.